Yeah, Taoiseach, I have to say that one aspect of your report there alarms me, as if things weren't bad enough in our economy here. You go off to the US and take tea with the Tea Party, so to speak. So, not coming back then with any ideas to end austerity anytime soon or for public investment that is so desperately needed here. But in any case, what I want to ask you mainly is the substance of your discussions with President Obama on the proposed trade agreement between the United States and the European Union. Can I ask you specifically, what did you discuss and how much detail did you go into? Or did you merely reinforce the propaganda that both you and President Obama have been propagating, that is really just a regurgitation of the claims made by the major multinationals, which see the type of trade agreement that they are trying to drive as a source of massively increased profits, and for which they have been furiously lobbying? And have you subjected the claims being made for massive jobs increases, etc., for this trade agreement to reality? And the fact, for example, that the same was said in regard to the North American Free Trade Agreement involving Canada, the United States and Mexico, where jobs have been lost and where working people have been seriously discommoded in relation to what the effect of that agreement is. I mean, are you aware of the details that have been leaked from the negotiations between the EU Commission and the United States, that what the big corporates want on both sides of the Atlantic is full-scale liberalisation and privatisation, further privatisation of public services, with the concomitant pressure downwards on wages and conditions for working people? I mean, have we not learned from the savage proposals of Bausch and Lomb to drive workers in Waterford into penury, into poverty, to maintain their profits? That written large is what's involved in this, in these proposals. And are you aware of the fact that the consumers, meaning the ordinary people in Europe, including in this country, do not want the standards that a big US agribusiness wants to push in relation to, for example, genetically modified food to be opened up in Europe, hormone-fed beef, chlorine-washed chicken? These are all anathema to ordinary people in Europe. And lastly, Taoiseach, did you discuss with the President of the United States the implication of the investor-state dispute mechanism, by which business interests, as proposed in this agreement, override even the laws and the ability of states to make sovereign laws? Where, for example, Canada, as a result of the NAFTA agreement, is currently being challenged by a major corporate for huge damages because it put a moratorium on fracking, which is considered to be an intrusion on the rights of business to do business as they wish. I mean, I just don't really think that you are up to speed in what is involved here. But I am asking you nevertheless, if you've gone into these kind of details with the President of the United States, rather than each of you reinforcing the type of propaganda that's obviously been fed to you by the big business lobbyists.
Thanks, Deputy Higgins. May I congratulate Deputy Coppinger on her election to the House, and I'm sure it's not that you need to learn anything, but you have a good steward there beside you, as on the Kiri. I think Deputy Higgins, it's important to remember that things are not the way they used to be, and that people from this country no longer go to America with one hand as long as the other. There are 100,000, between 80 and 100,000 American people employed in Irish-owned and Irish-run firms across 50 states, and that's set to continue and to expand, which I think is an important recognition of the progress that we have made with our people over many years. The question of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, this has the potential to create 500,000 jobs in Europe, and similarly in the United States. Obviously, Europe and the US have a very closely integrated economic relationship, but it's not one that has been fulfilled, as it were, in terms of its job potential. Now, yes, you mentioned the very difficult situation insofar as the purchase of Bosch and Lomb is concerned, and I do hope that the discussions that are taking place there can sort this out in a way that Waterford and the southeast are not going to lose out heavily. I'd point out to you that I was down in Intel in Leixlip there recently. They spent $5 billion in the last 3 years, the single biggest investment ever made in the history of the state, where there have been 5,000 construction workers from this country employed for the last number of years in building a plant that nobody is actually working in yet, but which will guarantee the future for very highly skilled Irish workers and others over the next 25 years. I'd point out to you that it's the first time in 40 years that Irish engineers were challenged and came up with a positive outcome in actually designing a chip in the Intel plant in Leixlip instead of just manufacturing one. This is a case of obviously the intellectual property being vested here, which is an extraordinary achievement. And when you consider what is coming at us in terms of what they call the Internet of Things. And I'd point out to you that, for instance, the Aragon plant in Westport is the subject of a 300 million investment, where very considerable employment is being created at the moment in terms of construction of that. I was down in Sligo just last week with Minister Perry at the opening of the AbbVie plant, which is another significant investment. But not just that, it's the very highly skilled workforce that are there, Deputy Higgins. And what they're going to be doing is producing the serum and the vaccine for hepatitis C, which has a cure rate of 95% for the people that it's intended for, which will bring, a comfort and a quality of life to them, millions of people around the world. I think there are about 23,000 who would be affected to their benefit here in Ireland. While it's an expensive, very expensive drug, is one that's being produced by AbbVie down in Sligo. I didn't discuss the intricacies of fracking with President Obama. Clearly, this has transformed the United States. I'm not sure that everybody would be happy with the outcome in terms of the way this is performed in some states. But it's reduced energy prices in the US by very considerable amounts, which, while Europe has gone the other way in terms of increasing energy, it makes it so much more competitive for serious investment for long-term situations in the United States by major companies, as against possibly siting in Europe. That's not a case of saying you have to have fracking everywhere. There are fors and against all of these issues. And the Keystone pipeline is a major issue of discussion in the United States between Canada southwards, and that's an issue for the American government to deal with. But I would say that in terms of the relationship between EU and the US, I don't see why we should be afraid of this. These are the two most economically developed entities on the planet, and you can set down the conditions for world trade for the next 25 or 30 years, assuming you can get a conclusion on the TTIP arrangements. And when this was raised at the meeting of the G8 in Lough Erne in Fermanagh, where I had the opportunity to attend because we held the presidency of the EU. The response was very swift, and the discussions have been quite progressive, as I understand it. There are very good people representing Europe, and indeed equally so from the United States. And there are difficulties in some areas that always come to light when you get down to the nitty-gritty, as it were. People will say, I'm in favour of free trade, and I'm in favour of all of these things, until it begins to hit in a particular sector. And that's where the discussions have to actually get together. The proposal, Deputy Higgins, is that the transatlantic trade investment agreement has the potential to boost the GDP of Europe by about 0.5%, and as I said, create between 400,000 and 500,000 jobs. Obviously, another advantage is that the agreement would enable Europe, and Ireland as a consequence, to develop the regulatory standards that are not only of benefit to the EU and to the US, but will also strengthen the multilateral trading system that's of particular importance in the area of intellectual rights, Concorda, and environment and labour standards that you speak of. These are important issues. So there's a global knock-on effect to come from this.